Hello and welcome to another patron-only video. Here I am completing my series of my top 10 most overrated movies, where I get into my top 3 most overrated movies, in my opinion, of course, of all time. Now here, even though I know this video is just being viewed by patrons, Patreon supporters, I still feel the need to give a trigger warning because, oh boy, there's a reason these 3 movies are in my top 3. The reason why I consider them the most overrated is because they're loved the most. And I talked about overrated before. The whole, by very definition, overrated, you're saying everyone else is wrong. And so that's why it's very precarious to mention overrated, and probably why I'm doing it in Patreon instead of releasing it on my channel. Because, oh boy. In fact, not to get too many spoilers, but my number 1 movie, people have received death threats for not liking this movie. And I could imagine like all 3 of these movies might blow some fuses, even among my Patreon supporters. So I will give you that warning. Take what I say with a grain of salt, just my opinion. I do trust, though, if you're supporting on Patreon, that you do like to hear my thoughts at least. So there's that. Anyway, hopefully I won't alienate anyone because of this. So anyway, let me get into my top 3 most overrated movies, in my personal opinion, starting with my number 3, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, I know this has seemed like one of the greatest films of all time. Kubrick is a genius and all that. And to be fair, in recent years, when I went to film school, I did the class where they were examining this movie, and to be fair, I sort of learned to appreciate it a bit more because I could see why people liked it and why they consider it a masterpiece, because there's a lot of subtext in the storytelling. But to be honest, I love subtext in my movies, but it's hard for me to articulate, but there's a certain style that it has to be in, and a certain style where, if it's a style like this movie where it just comes off as boring, but no, if you look underneath the boringness, you can see there's reasons for everything. And there is, I will grant you that. There's definitely a lot of metaphors and meanings behind this, but this style of movie, where it just on the surface appears boring, but no, if you look underneath, there's subtext, is not appealing to me. It's not my thing, and on the surface, this does seem like the slowest paced movie of all time. Now, I'm not saying slow pace is... What I mean by that is there might be movies that are more slow paced, but they're actually good. But what I mean by that is that it feels slow because it feels like there's just... and here's the other thing. A lot of people and a lot of the film students I went to film school with love this movie. And because they're more interested in the craft of filmmaking, they're more interested in cinematography, the visuals, the visual storytelling method, music, and the use of the tools of filmmaking. And some people, not just film school students, but a lot of people go to seeing films because of that. And I appreciate those things too, but for me, the story comes first. I appreciate those things if they enhance the story being told. And I know a lot of people are going to argue that they do in fact enhance the story being told in this movie, but I disagree. That is not how I see it. I see the movie is all about, oh, look at this cool cinematography, look at this cool sequence with music, look at this cool metaphor, look at this cool thing, look, isn't it cool? But the story is not much there. The beginning drags on for way too fucking long with the monkeys. That, to me, is one of the most pretentious things ever. And of course, it gets even worse when we get into space. And I know they're not monkeys or whatever. You know what I mean. But anyway, it gets worse when we get into space. And there's a space station. Boring. And it just drags out way too long. I do appreciate the ending, which is meant to be all psychosemantic and weird visuals, but it was too confusing for me. I love confusing endings. Some of my favorite movies have them. This one didn't work for me, and the plot with the killer robot, that seemed just like a cliche Maybe it wasn't as cliched in 1960s when it first came out. I don't know. But I do know it is cliched now. And it just came off as a bland, boring story. Sorry. I do not see what is so great about this film. Well, I do know why other people say it's great, but I don't agree. Anyway, that didn't make you angry. Well, let me test you out. Let's push my luck here with my number 2, Citizen Kane. And the reason why, let's explode. The reason why Citizen Kane is my number 2 is because whenever anyone has like a shorthand for the best movie of all time, they simply say Citizen Kane. They throw it out here like it's a given. It's become part of pop culture. This is the Citizen Kane, or they like a movie. Oh, this movie is the Citizen Kane of modern times, or whatever. And they, throw this word around like it's a given. Any top 5, any top 10 list you ever see, Citizen Kane will be guaranteed to be there. And a lot of people, several people I appreciate, like celebrities who I admire, would say, asked what their favorite movie of all time is, it's Citizen Kane. Now, the thing with Citizen Kane, and there has been a little bit of pushback against it, is because it is very outdated. This it's a biopic. And this formula of a biopic has been done a trillion billion times since, to be fair, after this movie came out, and better. It's been done way better since this movie came out. But defenders of the movie say, well, that's unfair. You cannot judge this movie for stuff that happened after it, because when it came out, there was no movie like it before. It was a trailblazer. There would have been none of those other great biopics that you love. Was it not for Citizen Kane? It proved the way, and it showed the way, and that's why it's a good movie. Now, and, okay, fair. I will grant you. It is a trailblazer. It is a classic. I won't say it's not a classic, because you're right. We may not have had as many great biopic movies as we did if it wasn't for this movie. But that doesn't make it a good movie. It certainly doesn't make it the best movie of all time. Not in my opinion. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, even though maybe this is not the film's fault at all. Maybe it's not the film's fault. It's just how history played out. But in my opinion, when I judge what is truly a great movie, especially if it's an older movie, does it seem dated? Does it live up to modern times? And the answer is no. This is not a great movie in my opinion. You might think that's unfair for me to judge it in that way, but I think that you have to. I mean, as I say, you can still acknowledge it's classic. You acknowledge that it's trailblazing. You acknowledge that it is worth mentioning in annals of the filmmaking, and has a special place in film history. But that's not the same thing as being the greatest movie of all time, in my humble opinion. And also, it's because when I watch this movie, I just think it's kind of boring. I don't think it's that great. And it's hard. And people say, no, but you'll understand it was trailblazing when it came out. But I wasn't alive in the 40s. How am I supposed to know what it was like when it came out? I don't think it's fair to expect someone to judge it by a standard of over 50 years ago when most people weren't even alive. So, no, I am judging it by now, compared to everything else I saw, compared to that, it's average at best. At best. Anyway, okay, let me get into my number 1. And if you haven't guessed by my little tease about people receiving death threats for not liking this movie, The Dark Knight. And not The Dark Knight Rises, just simply The Dark Knight. Oh my God, why so serious? I have, to be fair, I have mentioned this on my channel before, so I was brave enough, and I haven't received any death threats yet. I did receive a lot of yelling, oh my God, Mark, what the hell is wrong with you, from Don and Josh when I did a video with them. But I, honestly, when I went home after seeing this movie, I went to IMDb, and it was like, IMDb has their top 250 of all time, and like Shawshank Redemption was number 1 for like the longest time. And so when I went and saw this film, I went to that, and this was number one on there. And then I think a couple of weeks later it was number two, but then went back from number one. So it kept switching from number one to number two. And I was like, huh? And I was like, oh, maybe people are just excited because it just came out. And everyone loves Batman. And so the people are just hyping it up, overhyping it because it just came out. But nope. Years later, everyone's going on about how it's a classic. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. Look, I'm a Christopher Nolan fan, if you know, because I saw Memento. I enjoyed Batman Begins, and I loved freaking Memento is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I loved The Prestige, which also came out before this. Inception hadn't come out yet, but I loved that as well. So, so I was a Christopher Nolan fan, so I went and saw this movie, and in my humble opinion, and this is why I had planned on doing a Christopher Nolan top 10 on my channel for a long time, but this movie would not rate high. To me, this is one of his lesser movies, and I know people would flip their lids because a lot of people, and this sounds very hipster of me, I know, but a lot of people hadn't even heard of Christopher Nolan until this movie, and they love Christopher Nolan because of this movie. Where me, I was into Christopher Nolan because of Memento, because of The Prestige, and later also Inception and Interstellar, which and this, what frustrated me is when I saw Interstellar, so many people was like, oh, you're just saying you like this movie because you're a Christopher Nolan fanboy because you like The Dark Knight. That pissed me off because I don't even like The Dark Knight. I loved Interstellar for its own standards. Now, talking about The Dark Knight, to me this is one of Christopher Nolan's most pretentious films. And maybe, I don't know, I would go in to see a comic book movie about Batman. I expect to have certain expectations about it being a bit comic booky. And to me, like, don't get me wrong, I like the artistic take on the comic book genre, which is why I actually liked Batman Begins. And another thing people would hang me for, I actually prefer The Dark Knight Rises to this. Hang you! There's so many flaws with The Dark Knight Rises. What the fuck is your problem, Mark? But it's a comic book movie. It's supposed to be silly. It's supposed to be silly and over the top, not overly pretentious. Be like, ooh, look at how artsy I am. This is another movie where I felt like Christopher Nolan, I love his work. I love his artistic style in Memento. I love his artistic style in Prestige. I love it in Interstellar. A lot of people saying Interstellar was pretentious. No, it wasn't. It was artistic. It was beautiful. This movie was fucking pretentious. I'm sorry, but it was. The moment, and I said this before, when I saw it in the movie theater, in the moment where the Joker burned the big pile of money to show that he didn't care about the money, it was all about the game between him and the Batman, I nearly walked out of the theater. That is the pinnacle of pretentiousness for me. That's stupid, burning the money. I mean, fine, have it be like the Joker cares more about his fight with Batman than he does about the money. That's fine, but this takes it too far, in my opinion. And plus, the movie just drags. The story just drags. Like I kept waiting, looking at my watch, waiting for the movie to end. Did not be the need to drag out that long, and the did stuff just for shock value, like the whole thing with the what's her face, Batman's love interest dying. That seemed to, it was just for shock value. And the very ironic thing about this movie is I've heard some people say I didn't like the Two-Face stuff. Whenever I watch this movie, I skip over the Two-Face stuff and just watch the Joker stuff. For me, it's the exact opposite. I like the Two-Face stuff. I didn't like the Joker stuff. And some people would be like, what the fuck? Because Heath Ledger's amazing. Why don't you like Heath Ledger? What's your problem with Heath Ledger? I don't have a problem with Heath Ledger. He's fine. He does a good job as Joker. But to say he's one of the most best performance of all time, is iconic, and he deserved a fucking Oscar for it, is just wrong. It's okay. It's average. It's why so serious. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's a bad performance, but it's not like one of the best things ever either. So now I wonder, so if I did release this on the internet at large, I'm pretty sure I would have received death threats. Hopefully I won't have anyone pull their Patreon support. Maybe I should have rethought this. But anyway, I have to be honest. I have to be honest, and this is my honest opinion of what the most overrated movie of all time, because it's still up there. I don't know if it's number one IMDb, but it's at least in the top 5. And it's on all sorts of lists. People consider it one of the greatest movies, greatest comic book movie of all time. I think it was average at best. It went on for too long. There was a lot of issues with it, a lot of things. Like the whole thing with the ferry. Ooh, do we blow it up now? Do we blow that? I'm like, that's boring. That's pretentious. Get on with it. Anyway, I talked enough. Hopefully I did not alienate anyone with that, because those were pretty doozies. Next month, for the Patreon only videos, I'm going to get into my top 10 most underrated movies of all time. So instead of pissing people off by trashing movies they love, I'm going to come up as a hipster by saying, ooh, I'm talking about movies you've never heard of. Well, you probably heard of some of these movies. Maybe not, maybe you haven't seen it, but I think they're underappreciated, underrated movies. So please be sure to join me for that. Again, thank you guys so very much for supporting the channel. I do apologize if I upset you with this video. Hopefully you liked hearing my thoughts and what I have to say, and I do appreciate your continued support of the channel, and I will see you guys next time.